My name is Gail with the Minnesota Cuban Committee, Solidarity Committee on the Americas, and I'll be chairing the program tonight. And before turning it over to our featured speaker, Gail, I'm going to take a look back at the early days of the Friendshipment Caravan, particularly Caravan number 2 in 1993, which is a very dramatic event. Story of the little yellow school bus, and this is relevant for a couple of reasons, but it's an important story, and also it's apropos because for the first several years of Pastors for Peace, the headquarters was right here in Minneapolis, the U of M, 17th Avenue. Lucius Walker, the founder of Pastors, got the idea to start the organization after a trip to Nicaragua in 1988. Gail was on as well. Traveling by boat from the west of Nicaragua to the east, the boat was fired on by contras, killing 2 people and wounding 29 others, including Reverend Walker. So beginning in 1992, pastors began organizing caravans, taking humanitarian aid to Cuba in addition to Central America, without seeking authorization from the U.S. government. In 1992, the president was George H.W. Bush. His father, Prescott Bush, patriarch of the family, was a powerful senator, a mentor to a Southern California politician named Richard Nixon, and he was very wealthy, owning, among other things, 10,000 acres of land in Cuba, owning it, that is, until May of 1959, when the first major acts of the revolution was a major land reform, nationalizing foreign land holdings like that. So for the Bush family, the Cuban Revolution was not just a political abstraction. So the government in 1992 was very hostile, but the caravan persisted when the U.S. refused to let trucks cross the Mexican border carrying aid. The Caravanistas carried boxes, handed boxes in a chain across the bridge into Mexico. And it had mostly things like medical aid, and some old IBM 286 computers, and the government's efforts to stop this drew a lot of media attention. So that was good. And that meant that the next year, 1993, there was anticipation for what would happen with the caravan that year. And there were 300 participants in the caravan that year, including Gail and myself. And in all from Minnesota, we had 15 participants, including 2 people from the Star Tribune, a reporter and a photographer. There was also a reporter from the Pittsburgh paper. So we had some built-in media coverage. And along with truckloads of medical supplies and computers, we took 3 very used school buses. One of the employees of pastors and one of the Caravanistas was a bus mechanic, which was a good thing. Some of those buses broke down. In preparation for going, we painted these buses with slogans and decorations. One of the people helping with that was a Colombian immigrant who got enthused and asked at the last minute to go. It was accepted. And he explained that he first got interested in Cuba when he was working as an EMT, an emergency medical technician, in Colombia. One night in the emergency room, there was some visiting emergency doctors from Cuba saying they wanted to observe the treatment of bullet wounds, saying they didn't have experience with that. So that got Andres' attention. What kind of country is this? Now, if you go south on 35, you end up in Laredo, Texas. And the road ends with a sign saying Mexican border 500 meters ahead. And as we speak, that border is a scene of brutal human suffering by people trying to immigrate here, the U.S. trying to keep as many of them out as possible. When the caravan came across the border there in 1993, we carried or passed hundreds of boxes across again, like the previous year. But then the government stopped and only got 3 school buses. There's 13 people on the bus, including Lucius Walker. He proposed that the people remain on the bus, engage in a hunger strike until the bus was released.
Yeah.
Late July in Laredo, Texas there, it's 100 degrees every day, blazing sun. The bus provides the shade, but had to be sweltering inside there. Most of the rest of the caravan proceeded Cuba as planned, and a group of about a dozen of us stayed there at the border organizing political and logistical support, and I was part of that group. Now, the rationale put out by the government for seizing the bus was that it could be used by the Cuban military. Well, as naive as American people are politically, that argument was not going to fly. Having experience as a bus driver, I was one of those who helped drive those buses down there. The one in question, first gear did not work. You had to start moving in second gear. And there's a spare transmission in the back, which was, I think, supposed to be an emergency exit valve. So it was not exactly a military threat. Maybe a little more cleverly, the government held a press conference one day with a trash barrel, pulled out some fast food wrappers, claiming that the hunger strikers were really eating, that they weren't on hunger strike. And then on another day, they delivered boxes of military rations, meals ready to eat, they were called. Sounds pretty tempting, right? But the hunger strikers refrained. Now there was heavy press coverage locally in South Texas there, and in Mexico, and in Cuba, and here in the Strip, and in Pittsburgh. But nationally, not so much. I recall a couple of times I answered the phone, and a woman says, "This is so-and-so from the New York Times. Can you send us a press release?" Well, that was kind of lame, because we were sending out press releases every morning. So they had probably a stack of them. That weekend, they did run a picture of Lucius Walker with a caption about 1 sentence long. And we had a demonstration there in Laredo on the weekend. A few days later, the rest of the main group of the caravan returned. So people again returning home. A big group of us stopped in Houston, Texas for a couple of days. We did a demonstration there. And about half dozen or so people, including Gail, did civil disobedience, blocking the doorway and spending a rough weekend in a Texas jail. And after 2 weeks of hunger strike, Cuban people stepped more into the picture. Raul Suarez and the Martin Luther King Center began a solidarity hunger strike in front of the U.S. intersection, as it was called. As they were setting up their tents, etc., a 13-year-old girl named Morelos came to the intersection to deliver a letter that she had written, asking the U.S., or calling on the U.S. to end the blockade. When she tried to hand it to them, they refused to take it, if you can imagine that. After that imperial arrogance, she went out back outside and talked with people from the Martin Luther King Center. And after conferring with her parents, she joined the hunger strike. 8 days later, the U.S. government blinked and said the bus could go to Cuba. So this was a real victory, a blow to the U.S. anti-Cuba aggression. And this resulted finally in national media coverage in the U.S., CNN, the New York Times, and the like. And Lucius and the hunger strikers invited those like myself, who had not gone to Cuba before, to join them on a triumphant journey to Cuba with a school bus, which became a symbol of solidarity in Cuba. The leaflet for this meeting features the thing of a school bus, as you see. Now, 1993 was a very difficult time in Cuba. After the collapse of the Soviet bloc, which accounted for 85% of Cuba's foreign trade. And that led to a huge decline in the economy, electrical blackouts, shortages of food, and many basic things. They called it a special period in time of peace, or special period for short. So the Friendshipment struggle and victory was a big morale boost for people there at that time, which is much needed. One indicator of how big a deal it was in Cuba, the day we came, the headline in the newspaper grandma was Gail, which means they arrived. It was a reference to our group of a couple dozen activists and hunger strikers from the U.S. And at the airport, we were greeted by Fidel as we got off the plane. And then there were 5 people from the Martin Luther King Center who were on the sidewalk cheering, waving, and singing their anthem that they created during their hunger strike. Que no caiga la fe, que no caiga la esperanza. Don't lose faith, don't lose hope. After chatting with some of them in my weak Spanish, I opened the door to the terminal, and sitting right there was Pedro Ross, the head of the CTC, the Cuban Union Federation, which had organized thousands of workers' assemblies to discuss what could be done to boost output in the face of the difficult situation. As part of the red carpet treatment we got, our bus had a motorcycle escort. And the extreme skinniness of the motorcycle policeman is an enduring memory of mine of the effects of the special period. Growing up in northern Illinois, my mental image of cops was the burly off-motorweight cops who rained down billy clubs on anti-war protesters in Chicago in 1968 Democratic Convention. So seeing an emaciated policeman was a shock. One night, we were taken to reception and meeting with Fidel. And afterwards, I was one of the closest to the back door and went out and toward the parking lot. I stopped to wait for the others, and as I turned, I was staring eye to eye with Fidel. He's about the same height as I am. He was a voice in the back of my head saying, "Say something, Joe." So I did. I said, "Buenas noches." But there was a good side to that minimalist effort. That seemed to amuse him. He smiled and said, "Buenas noches." And by that time, other people were running up, jumping next to him to pose for selfies. And, but that has an enduring memory for me. And that victory, I think it made the government think twice about actions against people challenging the blockade. They have never really tried to prosecute activists for violating the blockade travel ban. So I think this underlines the importance of the Pastors for Peace caravans. Right now it's a very difficult time for Cuba. On top of the effects of the blockade, which was tightened by Trump, with his restrictions maintained and added to by Joe Biden. The pandemic was a big blow, forcing Cuba to cut off tourism. And then Cuba was hit by a hurricane and then by an oil beetle fire. Now there's a severe shortage of oil and gasoline because some of Cuba's suppliers, like Venezuela, are unable to meet their commitments. Some people compare it to the special period. Older Cubans say that the special period was worse because of the food shortages. For sure, our solidarity is needed very much and much appreciated. And I'm looking forward to being part of the caravan again this year when we'll be going to Santiago, where with a group of about 60 people. It'll be the 70th anniversary commemoration of the Moncada Uprising in 1953. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Gail Walker, who's been the executive director of IFCO Pastors for Peace since 2010, taking up in the footsteps of her father. We've been fortunate to have hosted her here before, and we look forward to working with her and others from Pastors for Peace in the future. Gail.
First, I just want to thank Joe. That was a great history lesson. Sometimes it amazes me that here we are in 2023, and there's this great rich history and resistance that has been a part of this, that I've been really fortunate to be connected to through IFCO, but through many of you. So even just being in these rooms and seeing people, and everybody's working hard. We love Cuba. We know that Cuba really represents so much for us. It represents hope. It represents resilience. Say, help me with that. Resilience. Thank you. Resilience. And we need that. We need that example more now than ever on so many different fronts. So it's always exciting to kind of get on the road and get a chance to talk about Cuba. We had an opportunity to do a radio interview earlier today, WFAI. KFAI. The station, the Pacific station in New York is WBA. This isn't Pacifica, is it?
No.
No, it's community radio. Say it again, KFAI. I'm just changing the whole letters. Oh, thank you. See, I should know that. Thank you for teaching. Anyway, so there's been, it was really wonderful to have that opportunity. Craig, Claudia, and I had a chance to bounce around some info about Cuba and her recent experiences, and it was wonderful. But first, I want to thank Joe. Thank you so much for those kind words. I want to thank Calvary Baptist Church for providing this beautiful space for us to have this evening's event. And I want to thank, of course, the Minnesota Cuba Committee, as well as the Solidarity Committee on the Americas, for just helping to receive us, for helping to spread the word, for really being tremendous friends of Cuba, and helping to, I think, communicate the reality, because that's really a big part of why people say, well, why is it that you left home? Why is it that you go on the road and you do these things? Because we believe that Cuba has so much to offer, and there's so much, as you know, misinformation and disinformation about Cuba that's prevalent. And so part of it is just having this kind of exchange, being able to talk about the experiences that we've had over the last 30 years, organizing caravans as part of our larger solidarity movement. So many of us are engaged in so many different aspects. I know that the Minnesota Cuba Committee has been really strong at doing the film thing every year. We know that there's some incredible friends who've helped us, Marcy, etc., with really trying to get the word out about what the reality is about the blockade, but also to focus our attention on ways that we can push back against our elected officials, and really focus on policies that are rooted in sanity, and that are expressions of our support for our Cuban family. So all of that is incredibly important, and that's why this year we've got, as Joe mentioned, there'll be 60 people that will be traveling. We've got 2/3 of them are women, 2/3 young people of color under 35, which is wonderful. We have many of them, the majority of them, I think it's 40, it's their first time in Cuba. And that's really critically important. We love having return folk. I mean, it's important for all of us to continue to stand up and express our solidarity for Cuba, but it's really important, clearly, to bring new people. For new people to see and experience that reality. Because I'm going to tell you, before I got on the road, I was feeling a little overwhelmed. I was trying to do a bunch of different things, and I'm thinking, I wasn't feeling like I had my mojo until I talked to one of the young people who had just come back from Mayday. And that's what I needed. I needed that infusion of spirit and tenacity and willingness to fight and stand up for Cuba because of all what Cuba represents. And so I don't know that I'll do as great a job as my friend Angie did at giving me some inspiration. But I do want to share with you one thing. She was just down in Cuba. This is Angie Langdon. She does a lot of our media, social media work. And so she was just down in Cuba with the brigade, and she had a toothache. She had a really bad toothache. She had to have a tooth pulled. Nobody likes that, right? That's like some of the worst pain. But she was cared for by a Cuban doctor, a Cuban dentist. And she told me the story, I just beamed with pride. She tells me, if I can try to repeat this the way that she did, she said that the dentist went up and he sort of like gently touched her face, because she was struggling. He said, you remind me of my daughter. He said, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. And she said, I believed him. I just believed the pain was going to go. She goes, it was almost magical. It's like, he touched my face, and the pain went away. He said, stop. And she said, really? So, but I loved one of the other things that she said, as we go around and we talk about Cuba, I think it's important for us to recognize, Cuba represents hope for us in so many different arenas. We talk about health and education, the environment. But I like to say, we talk about Cuba as an example, and that's a big part of why the U.S. government is trying to kind of separate us from either traveling to Cuba. How many of you heard about the young people who were harassed on their way back from the May Day debate? That was very reminiscent, and those of you who've been doing this for a while, you know what I'm talking about. It's very reminiscent of what we were experiencing back during the special period, and subsequently. Being harassed at the airport, being intimidated. Some of that kind of had fallen away. We weren't hearing stories about that as much as we just recently did. And it reminded me, I was speaking with some of our colleagues here, I was just saying, it reminded me of the efforts to really scare people, to frighten people, to have that chilling effect so that people won't exercise their right to go to Cuba. That's what the caravan is about as well. It's saying we have a right to do this, that there's no reason that for the U.S. government to control who can and cannot go to Cuba. It's also an effort for us to challenge the government's 60-plus-year-old blockade of Cuba, to say, we won't allow the U.S. government's policies to frighten us from standing in solidarity with Cuba. The reality, and I think Greg said it today on the radio station, we talked about how life-changing traveling to Cuba can be. There's just so many things to learn, and there's so much for us to bring back. And that's why we continue to insist that people need to go and see Cuba for yourselves. Why do we say that? We know that we've got at least two major obstacles, right? There's the U.S. government's relentless campaign of misinformation, coupled with often the media's narrow focus of Cuba being the boogeyman. Those of us who've actually seen and experienced Cuba firsthand, we are the ones that need to be able to speak the truth. Speak our truth. And so the caravans are an opportunity to have conversations like this in communities across the country. There'll be 40 different events held in 40 different cities across the U.S. over the next 2 weeks. We'll be collecting support, and we'll get a chance to talk about that a little later on, so don't leave yet, because I'm going to I need to hone my preaching skills, or my preaching with those, what is it that they do, Frank? I think they call collections, right? We collect, we pass the hat. So we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit about that more later. But the reality is that Cuba has so much to offer, and we feel it's important to continue to talk, to lift her up, to be supportive, and to push back against our government's policies that are continually putting pressure on the Cuban people. We like to talk about the foot of the U.S. government being on the neck of the Cuban people since 1959, 1960, those first years of the 60s is when the caravan was really kind of fortified and put into place. And it's been tightened ever since. So there have been aspects of that. How many of you heard about this guy by the name of Robert Torricelli, the Torricelli Act, the Helms-Burton Act? These are all additional punitive measures that have been enforced to strengthen, give teeth to the blockade, and to really, attempt to further isolate Cuba and its people. So a lot of this we all know, right? But I think our responsibility is to continue to talk about it, to travel it, to try to encourage people who have not had a chance to visit the island to see and experience it for themselves. The other aspect of the caravan that's important is that we not only are we collecting funds to purchase desperately needed medicines. We've got a campaign where we're trying to raise $75,000 so that we can purchase medicines to take to Cuba. Why? It's not that Cuba is defenseless and is unable to care for itself or its people, but because of this long-standing draconian policy, Cuba has been denied access to some of the basic raw materials that allow it to create the medicines that its people need. It's not that Cuba's unable to do it, but the blockade is one of the most serious impediments. And that's terrible. I mean, we hear stories, and many of us know people who have suffered from illness and been unable to get care because they don't have access to medicine. We know people who died, who lost friends. And there's nothing more tragic than knowing that a curable disease was right in arm's reach, but unavailable to Cuba because of this policy. And I don't say that it's hyperbole, it's true. And I know I'm not the only one that had those experiences. And that's why I continue to do this. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm tired. But imagine what the Cuban people would feel, having had this policy in place for more than 6 decades. So that's why we continue to do this. But I talked to some of these young people who are inspiring. They're ready to roll up their sleeves, and I think it was one of the newest co-chairs of the National Network on Cuba, Shakril Montero, who said something to the effect, you all might have heard it, because you were, I think my understanding was down on May Day. She said, listen, we've got about 4 more years. In this period of time, we got about 4 more years before we shut this blockade down. She said, because we have a lot of other work to do. We got to fight climate change. We've got to fight racism. We've got to fight for reparations. We've got a lot of work to do. So when she said that, I kind of stood up and said, all right, I'm ready. Put me in, coach. So I think that that's the attitude that we've all got to maintain. I think the exciting thing is that there are so many new people that are connected with this movement. And that really has to do with Cuba. It has to do with what Cuba offers the world. There's nothing more exciting than hearing some of our young Caravanistas or young Brigadistas talk about the Family's Code, this recent legislation that was passed in Cuba's constitution that completely transformed the way that families are defined. And when, I had a chance finally to really read through some of it, and I thought, my God, if we could do something, anything, remotely something in the United States, how much further ahead we would be. But the defining a family, whether you are, LGBTQ, whether you're an elder, whether you're, you've got 2 daddies or 2 mommies, whatever it is that your family dynamic looks like, there's space for you because of this family code. And that's kind of what Cuba offers when it comes to all of these different arenas. There's a space for us. And I think that's, especially for young people, what really resonates. There's hope. There's hope that we can indeed start looking at, how it is that we truly put people first and address the ills that are hurting, they're killing our society, right? Whether we're talking about race, gender equity, there's just, on a variety of levels, there are attacks that are coming at us. And Cuba offers, it's not a panacea, it's not perfect, but it offers a perspective that I think is really, really important. Okay. No, I think we're going to have a little bit of a dialogue. I'm not going to sit up here and just talk at you. I mean, I think that, so like I said, some of this is information that's you're certainly aware of, but we are really, we owe it to Cuba. We owe it to Cuba to speak her name, to talk about what the Cuban reality is. Because if we just sit back and we listen to our elected officials and to our media, we'll have a complete, distorted view. And so that's a big part of why, not just me, not just the IFCO pastors and staff, but all of around Cuba's friends need to be out there speaking to our communities, to schools, to our, having events like this, speaking to our elected officials. I know that there's some people who don't want to deal with the elected. I get it. But I will say, in my opinion, that's what we have to do. We have a policy. We have a policy that's in place, and the only way that we're going to really kind of be able to flip that on its head is to take a deep breath, probably hold our nose in some cases. In some cases, maybe not every, there's some decent people out there trying to do work in the elected arena. But we have a responsibility to really lift up the truth about Cuba, and so that's part of what this Caravan project is about this year. I want to give enough time for us to have a dialogue, because I really don't want it to be sort of a one-way street, but I want to just raise a couple of things that I want you to be aware of. On the table, perhaps in the front, there by Franklin, we've got a couple of informational material things that I want you to, before you leave, take a look at. This young lady that I talked to with the toothache, much younger than me, a lot less gray hair, Angie, she made a couple of zines. One is about the state sponsors of terror, and the other is about the blockade. And the great thing, I think, the great thing about these, because I'm not that talented, first of all, let me show you this. I just think this is the coolest thing. It's one piece of paper. It's one piece of paper, but I don't know if she cut it, I don't know. But it gets folded up into these little, and it can be little, handouts, little, so you've got in the blockade, and you've got something about the state sponsors of terrorism, and there's more here, there's some that haven't been folded, but they're materials that we, our community can use. As you're out there, picketing, or at a demonstration, or somebody says, well, wait, what is the blockade? You really want to know? Here, got something that you can get them. Same thing with the state sponsors of terror, which is a horrific list that the U.S. has put Cuba on as yet another way to isolate her and to try to define her as a terrorist, when we know that, in fact, given some of the behavior of the U.S. government, that the terrorism tag ought to be in the place of some of our elected officials. So I want to make sure that you get a chance to look at that. We've got a few other things, that stickers and lots of informational materials about race and healthcare and religion and LGBTQI. But there's informational materials that I hope you will take a look at. And then my dear brother Franklin is doing a wonderful job of modeling this year's Caravan t-shirt. So thank you. He's a handsome fellow. It looks really good in red. So the back has information about the various accomplishments that Cuba has accomplished that we like to highlight. And the front is a picture of Cuba's national flower, the mariposa, and along written in the image of the Cuba, it says rooted in history. Rooted in revolutionary love, I should know that. But this is it's a homage to the 70th anniversary of the attack at Blockade. So we've got T-shirts, we've got little stickers, we've got a variety of different ways that you can show your love for Cuba, show your love for the Passage for Peace project, and to look at those as ways that you might make an economic donation to this work. It's really important that we are able to collect the funds that we're aiming to collect so that we can purchase these medicines in bulk to take down to Cuba. And we'll be bringing those with us in duffel bags and in our backpacks as we make our way down to the island this summer. So real quickly, we've got 60 people, as I mentioned, more than half are women, young people of color, 40 going for the first time. We'll be traveling to Orientes, the eastern end of the island. Again, getting a chance to visit Guantanamo to learn about the impact that Guantanamo is having on the Cuban people in Aymadera, which is a community where the Guantanamo base is located. So it'll be a really wonderful, I think, educational opportunity. We're gonna, and I never had the chance to climb up the little area of the Sierra Maestra, the Platinum.
Yeah, I don't know over there time for that.
Well, there's that, but yes, which is really cool. But anyway, I'm trying to exercise, so I'm not gonna pass out, but I'm gonna try to take that journey as well as part of this year's caravan. So there's a lot of really good, exciting stuff going on. I'm looking forward to it. I think that I just want to at least maybe stop here and now just say, you know, there are so many different ways that people can stay connected, and I hope that you will, whether, you know, through the local committees here, through the IFCO Passage for Peace. There are a variety of different ways that you can go to Cuba. I just encourage you to put that on the radar. Go with the caravan, go with the brigade, go with the delegation. Just go, have that experience, and then come home and talk about it. Talk about what your reality has been. Because that's the only way I think that we're going to change our government's policy toward Cuba, is by stopping the disinformation and presenting our realities of what truly Cuba is and all of what she has to offer. So there's like so much more that can be said, but I want to just maybe slow it down a little bit to see, Joe, would you like to, how do you want to handle?
Well, we're going to have one more short speaker
Okay.
about Miami caravans.
Yes, Andrew.
A couple of years ago, the people in Miami started a national movement of car caravans calling for the end of the blockade. And the police are going to talk a little about they have faced harassment down there and are waging a campaign for free speech. And while he's coming up, we have pledge envelopes. We can pass these pledge envelopes out for contributions that
we have formed a committee to defend free speech in Miami. It is because on the 26th of February, about 20 different right-wingers attacked a caravan of hundreds of cars in Miami. The caravan in Miami, to end the blockade of Cuba, have been going on for 33 months. And they have had hundreds of cars. And the right wingers down there got sick and tired of it. The various local governments, of which there are many, collaborated with the cops in basically the cops did not provide any protection whatsoever to the caravan. They, about 20 of the right-wingers attacked the caravan, breaking windows, tearing down signs, disrupting the caravan, and trying to provoke physical confrontation. Luckily, that didn't happen. So what we're about to do now is launch a national campaign for people in the Cuban solidarity movement in particular to take advantage of this opportunity, challenge, this threat that's posed to the people of Miami. Miami is very important. You know, many of the Caribbean are Cuban American, and the Cuban community is split on that. Cuban American and regular American, other Americans, have been mobilized to demand the end of the blockade. And that in itself is very powerful. Many people don't know about it. It has led to mobilization from internationally with cities throughout Canada, throughout the United States. I mean, numerous cities. And in Europe and elsewhere have collaborated in this effort. So we want to mount this effort. Minneapolis, New York, Chicago, you name it, numerous cities. And we have material on the table that gives you an idea as to the names of local government officials. We want to get endorsers for the campaign from individuals, from activists and others. And we want to approach, city council members, labor leaders, individuals of note to lend their names to the effort and to write letters to these politicians in Miami to demand that they protect free speech.
Okay, momentarily we're going to start taking comments and questions, but I want to let people know about one other important attack that took place last year, July of 2022. The FBI raided the offices of the African People's Socialist Party. They arrested people including Omali Yeshitela, the chairwoman of the chairperson of the group. And they were indicted in April of this year. So there's going to be a need for ongoing support for those people. Well, now, to start off our discussion period, I want to ask Greg Clady, who just returned from Cuba, to say a few words about his experience there. Greg?
Yeah, I just got back from my 7th trip to Cuba. Of course, the most influential trip you can take to Cuba is with the Solidarity Movement Pastors for Peace. It was through that experience that I was able to get in depth with all the sectors of society in Cuba to find out their truth. And then to befriend them and get together with them afterwards, after our days spent touring their facility, hearing about their lives, their work, and gave me the confidence to go back and then explore Cuba myself. What I found was, in spite of the hardships, and they're going through some of the most severe hardships, the lack of gasoline and oil that they need to run their economy, they were still working hard, and everything was going along almost, I couldn't notice any difference from years past when I went. They are, despite the hardships, and believe you me, they are facing hardships that you cannot imagine, that causes those that are the least able to help themselves to be having to work from sun up to sundown to make ends meet. Of course, they have their social foundation that the government provides that gives them the ability to have stability in their lives. But it just reinforces my commitment to stand with Cuba and do whatever I can to change this policy that's so criminal and psychopathic. There's no reason to it whatsoever. Despite what you might hear in the media. Even, I can hardly listen to National Public Radio anymore. With their claims of failed state. Well, how could a failed state defend itself and survive 60 years of the most severest economic blockade in history? How can it give confidence to the people that they need to move forward? And even, like I said, to be working with not the full financial and resource needs that they have. But again, I would not have had that knowledge or that commitment without my journeys to Cuba with Pastors for Peace, or Mayday, or the Vince Ramos Brigade, or the labor brigades that the labor organizations are going, and many others. And what it gave me was the opportunity then to go to different cities and villages as I explore and talk to the people there. They have access to tourists, but they said we rarely have access, or we rarely hear from people who are working in solidarity with Cuba to defend us, especially from the United States. They say usually all the solidarity activists are staying in hotels and things like that. So that was really good to hear. So anyways, that's basically if, our work is cut out for us, and right now we need people to help with this mission. We need, especially young people, to help with our social media campaigns, to fight this social media disinformation and mass media lies regarding Cuba. We need people to help us with our mission, to reach out to the city council, to reach out to our senators and representatives. We have made big inroads with the city council. Twice, with Gail's help, talking with Andrea Jenkins, we were able to pass a resolution calling on Congress and the administration to end the blockade. Again, just last year, we were able to have the city council pass a resolution calling on Congress and the administration to take Cuba off the state sponsors of terrorism list. And just lately, they sent a letter to the administration and the Minnesota Congress people, work to take Cuba off the state sponsors of terrorism list. And everybody on the city council signed that letter. And it goes to them, and we need to hold those senators and those representatives, we need to hold their feet to the fire. Are you listening to your constituents? Are you listening to the city council that you are supposedly representing. So we've got a lot of other good work that we're doing, especially we've got the University of Minnesota. We need to tell the stories. University of Minnesota College of Nursing has a memorandum of understanding with their compatriots at the University of Amanda to study the best practices of public health. We have delegations from the University of Minnesota College of Education, going down to study the pedagogy of education that Cuba has created. When I was down there, I stayed at the home of a woman, and she had a high degree in education, and she was telling me about the program that they have to teach languages to people, second language, and that they have a system that teaches people to learn Spanish faster than any other way, or even other languages. It doesn't even have to be Spanish, other languages. And they work with people around the world. So by going there, I've learned how to look outside the box, how things could be better here. And it always provides an example for me to explain to other people. Why can't we have health care for everybody? Cuba does. Why can't we have education to the highest degree for everybody? Cuba does it. You know, the family code and their democratic system. They don't need money to get to be the president of the country. Political capital is their service to their community, and that's how they get there. It's not by the connection that they have.
Thanks, Greg. Now we'll open up for comments, questions.
Gary Privo, I just came off a national Zoom call. SCOTA and the MCC, we're part of the national network in Cuba. And I just wanted to talk about two very specific things. One is a victory that has just happened that some of you may have noted in our notices in the last couple of days, and an upcoming demonstration. This week, the City Council of the City of Washington, D.C., passed a resolution. This became the 80th resolution to pass, either a labor union, a county, or a city. But this was a particularly important one, because obviously it's at the center of power in our country, and for that City Council to take the stand against the blockade and against Cuba's presence on the SSOT, after months of organizing by the members of the Solidarity Committee in Washington, they were able to achieve that victory. At this very moment, we have activists in our two largest cities in the United States, New York and Los Angeles, who are working on such resolutions. As Greg indicated, we already have them here in St. Paul and Minneapolis. It's already been passed in Chicago, Bay Area, many of the cities. But there's this ongoing work, and it's something that the people in Cuba have said to us is an ongoing inspiration to them when city councils and political bodies representing more than 46 million Americans have taken this stand. Secondly, on June 25, that's the date, Sunday, June 25, that our national movement has chosen to make our next National Day of Mobilization. It's going to be centered around 3 days in Washington, and we urge those that can make it to D.C. for a day of lobbying Congress on Friday the 23rd, a day of concert and cultural events on Saturday the 24th, and then a demonstration at the White House on the 25th. But we also know that many people will not be able to make it to Washington, so it will be demonstrations all around the United States. And here in Minneapolis, because that particular day, as most of you know, is Gay Pride Day, and is the scene of a very powerful statement against discrimination against our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters. And so, as we did last year, because it's a caravan day, we are going to be forming a contingent of SCOTA and the Minnesota Cuba Committee and anyone who wishes to join us to have a contingent in that parade that will highlight Cuba's families code and emphasize the need to get Cuba off the state sponsors of terrorism list. So I hope that you will participate in that event either by going to DC or being here in Minneapolis with us on that day. If you're not on our mailing list, you need to sign up, otherwise you will get notice from us as to exactly when and where that contingent is going to form. So, look forward to seeing you on the 25th of June, our next major activity.
Gail, I wanted to ask you, because Bert didn't provide the name, but the Secretary of State that you said made even more harsh treatment, was that the U.S. Kennedy's? Kennedy's, and I believe he was also Lyndon Johnson, the Secretary of State as well. Is he the one that imposed even harsher treatment towards Cuba?
Yeah, I was referring, right, I mean, not to say, there's probably a lot of nasty people doing nasty things, but I was referring to I guess it was, I mean, in terms of putting Cuba on the SSOT,
The what?
the state sponsors of terrorism list, putting Cuba on that. So I was referring to, is it Pompeo?
Yeah, I guess
Pompeo, right? Who was, yeah, who was,
surprising.
yeah, I know, right, Secretary of State.
Secretary of State under.
Right.
It's hard.
Yeah. So I'm just being that you said, but that's who I was, yeah.
I was
Well, it's just a curiosity, because I thought that Cuba was a little bit behind as far as gay rights, because maybe like 15 years ago, I thought people were complaining about it, so that, like in this one instance, maybe the US was a little bit ahead of them over there. So I just wonder if that's propaganda, or if they really were always ahead of us on that.
So I had an opportunity to go back and forth to Cuba over the years, since starting in 1992. There is the CENISEX, the Center for Sexual Education, okay, which is among the leaders of that, among them, it's not just solely, is the daughter of Raul Castro, thank you, Mariela Castro, who's been tremendous. I mean, really putting her name and her face and her personality out there to say, to express the rights of the LGBTQI community. And that organization, CENISEX, has really, I think, in many ways been very, focused and centered on the issues of concern within the community. There is a history that Cuba has had. So back prior to the, I guess after the triumph of the revolution, there had been a period of time in which there were people who were in the LGBTQI community who were not treated very well. And there's acknowledgement of that on the part of some of our friends in Cuba. But I think that there were so many examples of what Cuba has done positively in the community. I mean, we could go, it's a whole longer conversation, but one quick thing that I can talk about is certainly at the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, that there were efforts to try to really put resources, make resources available to folk who were HIV positive, to make sure that they were getting the foods and medicines and the care that was required to make them healthy. That was a commitment that had been made. So regardless of whatever kind of errors there might have been in the past, the ways that members of the community were treated, unjustly, unfairly, I think that there have been really efforts, multiple efforts over the years to try to turn that around and to really be a resource for the LGBTQI community. So that's at least as much as I would say on that. I hope that's somewhat.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I went to Cuba right before the pandemic, and it was interesting because you couldn't say a bad word about Obama, because a lot of us on that trip, we're not big fans of Obama's foreign policy, but because he took them off the terrorist watch list, they did really well, and it was revitalization. And then the other guy came in and put him on the terrorist list. Then we had hope that the president, Sleepy Joe, would wake up and discover that, oh yeah, I did say we were going to take him off the terrorist, but I don't think he remembers what he had for breakfast, other than what he said in the campaign trail. But I thought there was one interesting thing. When you listen to the guy who was runs the head of the Martin Luther King Center, he was a real genuine revolutionary. And he was talking about how the evangelicals from the United States are pouring money into Cuba and doing like outreach stuff with helping people with that, and then getting them, there's a huge evangelical movement, which is the carrot and the stick. They lure them in with the religion, and then they get a foothold in this conservative movement in Cuba, and it's really something that they really have to pay a lot of attention to. And they even they blocked the gay marriage resolution because one of the people on the ruling council was part of the evangelicals. So they have that to deal with too. And but I'm hoping that if you call Congress and call Senate people, if they get like 20 calls a day from different people saying the same thing about ending the blockade, they listen to this. They write that stuff down. It makes a difference because politicians are simple people. They're simple people. They listen to people like, oh shoot, there's a movement coming here. I got to get on the train. So I think what you're saying about you're talking about great work with city councils and getting the city councils and building that pressure and it gets Sleepy Joe off his ass and end this terrorist thing.
Yeah. That's important.
Thank you.
Hello, as an appreciation of this program, how to express it. It is a law of social development that our own working classes will someday in the not so distant future have to demand social ownership of the means of production in this country, or we must fly. However, will we take this step if we believe what they say, that socialism fails wherever it happens? Well, oh God, that's such a failure. Why have we spent untold billions of dollars and lives spent to diminish, undermine, and destroy it wherever it has emerged? We have to, and your work is helping to combat that line. And finally, regarding the blockade and the terrorist list, why is the regime of Sudan not on this? The terrorist regimes in Cuba is. I think we need to make that comparison to point out the deep hypocrisy of our leadership. Thank you.
I just want to respond to what the gentleman said about Biden, and I'm very disappointed as well. And I also was, in 2020, I was in Cuba in 2020, and came back in March of 2020. Barely made it out back in the country. Everybody was wearing masks September. I think it has to do with Florida. And I think that's part of the reason that Biden hasn't, kept his promise, so to speak, to kind of do what Trump redid, which was worse. myself, why, I don't even know if Marco Rubio, I believe in Cuba, I don't know, I know there's ancestry. I know there's ancestry there, and I know there's a lot of hatred of people that supposedly lost property during the revolution. You know, to what these lies have gone on for so many generations with Obama. He felt like he, you know, was dealt for policy, and so by him going there, and they just absolutely, I don't know, I think they had etched in stone what he said about this real foreign policy.
Just real quick, I do think that what you say about foreign policy in the United States as it relates to Cuba is very much connected to what's happening in Florida. It's, you know, we've always said it, right, there's a domestic aspect to this international policy as it relates to Cuba. It's about winning votes too often, and winning in Florida, and it kind of gets messy, it gets in the way and creates all kinds of problems. But I think it's important to continue to speak about it, you know, and really help people get that and understand it, because a lot of people don't.
Everybody I talk to, it's just, you know, this is the greatest place. You get on a plane in Miami and you're down already, and here you're in a paradise. It's just, it's absolutely unbelievable. Trying to get people excited.
Well, what the U.S. has waged a 60-year-long, what a 60-year-long bipartisan economic and political war against Cuba. Now, any idea that Biden would be, you know, be into that, and even Obama, I mean, his foreign policy towards Cuba did not have the Cuban people at heart at all. We should put no confidence in these politicians. You know, this has been state policy for over 60 years. But really, the fear and the hatred that the U.S. rulers have towards the Cuban Revolution is an extension of their fear and hatred of the U.S. working class. And that the U.S. working class might see and learn from the example of the Cuban Revolution and organize to take political power ourselves. And really, the best thing that we can do here in the United States to defend the Cuban Revolution is to build the type of party that can take political power and emulate what the Cubans did.
Yeah, it's, Cuba's example, like I said before, it's not just theoretically, but concretely, when you really see what Cuba has been able to do, as Frederick was saying, remember about the, you know, education to the highest levels, healthcare, sexual reassignment surgery, you know, there's so many different places where Cuba really has, I think, you know, led the way in terms of really addressing the needs of the population. So I think that's the fear. That's the pushback. That's why there's, you know, I think, anxiousness on the part of perhaps the U.S. The government, because they see, I believe, or I like to believe, that I think part of why there were so many young people that were threatened, that were attempts to intimidate them as they were coming back from Mayday through Florida, even through Miami or Fort Lauderdale, is because there's an increasing number of young people who are really turned on by Cuba and what it has to offer. And I think that's the fear. Wow, you know, all these young people are like all pumped up about this family code, and they're pumped up about, and I think that that's why, where there had been this lull, like we weren't seeing the intimidation, suddenly, they really came down on both. I think it's really an effort to try to scare people. That chilling effect. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we really shouldn't be surprised about the Biden administration. This has been a consistent policy, bipartisan policy, ever since the beginning of the revolution. The debate in Washington has been about how to get rid of the revolution. One group wants to squeeze the revolution to death,
and the other ones want to hug the revolution to death. And for a brief moment, this is what the Obama administration represented. The Cuban Revolution is a threat. You got to look at it from the perspective of the ruling class of this country and the crisis inside the United States. Think about what working people are facing today in the United States. The latest figures on the number of people who died from fentanyl. That's a measure of the deep alienation. The lack of solidarity that oftentimes exists within the capitalist society. Cuba is a bad example from the perspective of the ruling class. This is what we have to face when we talk to people, when we explain to people. Oftentimes people will ask, but I thought policies had changed. I thought, why are we still doing this? And the problem is it's not our government. That's the problem that we got. It should be our government.
No.
It should be, but it's not our government. Our government would be doing this. If it was really a government of the working class, it wouldn't be treating the Cuban people the way it is. And we have to explain this to people to make sure they understand, and so that we not create any kinds of illusions and so on, and to make it very clear that what the Cubans are doing is something that should inspire us to be doing inside the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
Woo.
He's got a question first.
Yeah.
I already spoke.
I think it's important, to remember, Cuba stood up to this for 60 years, right? They stood up to military attacks, the threat of nuclear annihilation. They stood up to the blockade and economic embargo. Things are very tough in Cuba now. The lack of gas, the lack of medicine, et cetera, the lack of access to the international banking system makes everything more difficult. But I don't look at the Cubans as victims. They're fighters. That's the one way you can explain the fact the revolution is still there. Every day, working people and farmers in Cuba have to figure out, how am I going to make this machine work today? We got to make a new part because we can't buy it. When they made the vaccine for COVID, how are we going to do this on this old-ass machinery we got here? Et cetera, et cetera. Up and down through all of society. Because they're fighters, The reason Cuba has such good education, good health care, et cetera, is because they made a revolution. Capitalism doesn't dictate anymore in Cuba. The workers and farmers, they're a different class. As Fidel said when they were going on the victory march into Havana, I used to wear the uniform of the July 26th movement, but I see different uniforms here in the crowds. The peasant shirt, the worker's uniform, that's who's in power now. So, there's a medical shortage in Cuba now because of the embargo. It's one of the ways they try to make Cuba suffer. If you read the Star Tribune this morning, you read about the medical shortage of medicine in the United States. Cuba's medicine shortage is a weapon from the capitalist class used against them. In this country, it's just the working of capitalism. You can't get a lot of cancer medication now because it's very low supply because, we're not making money on it. Well, you tell me that's only one reason why we need to emulate the Cubans and what they did. Yeah.
Tell me, so did you want to say something, Greg?
No, Greg, my question was in regards to the increase of youth, American youth, in the concern about Cuba, and what's bringing all these youth, and especially what I saw from the Solidarity contingent this year, May Day, was a lot of youth of color. What's creating that? Do they see this fight as their fight, and why?
I believe they are along the lines of what I was saying before. I think that there are certain things that are happening in Cuba that people, or young people are able to resonate with it. They're seeing in Cuba something they're not seeing necessarily in their own government in terms of the way they treat people. That's what I believe. I'm not have it talk about perfection, right? So it's not perfection across the board, but Cuba has offered so much, and people see that. So, I mean, and I'm talking about young people that are way more articulate than I am about the family code. I mean, I think I know a little something, but, you know, I really appreciate the way that they kind of gets teased out and dissected in a way that speaks to, you know, what people need and are looking for in terms of support from their own representatives. So I think that those are examples of why Cuba is so, it really speaks to what younger folk are looking to do, particularly those who have some kind of consciousness. And real quickly, you know, we keep hearing about the S word as if it's, you know, terrible, socialism. So I think there are a lot of young people who are not frightened by socialism and in fact embrace it and see Cuba as offering something that, you know, is not being offered here. So I think that those are examples, you know, I mean, that's not the whole answer across the board, but I think it's an example as to why we're seeing more and more young people that are just really, you know, excited and turned on by Cuba. I mean, that's perhaps a little simplistic, but that's my analysis, just kind of looking and seeing, wow, we are seeing a clamp down in a way that we haven't seen in recent times, and I think it's to try to frighten people, you know, and I think our responsibility is to kind of support young folk while they're out here and educate them so they know they need to know what the possibilities are when they come back, and that they're prepared to fight. And if anybody in the room was on brigade and you do get a letter or get some kind of notice from the U.S. government officials, please, please, please do not attempt to handle that by yourself. You want to reach out to brigade leadership, to people like the MCC, the SCODA, the IFCO pastors. But that's the kind of messaging I think, you know, it's important for people to know and get. You know, attempt to maneuver in these times, because there's a reason for that.
Well,
Clamping down.
maybe it's about time to wrap it up. Say thank you to Gail. One way of saying thank you is to donate generously they're trying to collect $75,000 for medical aid. We have these envelopes, so I hope everyone has gotten one of these envelopes and these t-shirts.
So,
Let's
you
say
want
$20.
to be fashionista, you know, there's always the t-shirts in various sizes are $20. If I can just say real quickly, the $75,000 is that we're trying to raise for medicine. We know that Cuba has really been, you know, kicked to the curb when it comes to U.S. policy, and there's some tremendous shortages that are directly related to the blockade that relate to medicine. One of the reasons that Angie, when she was down there, she got her treatment, she had to get penicillin. She felt so guilty because she's like, I don't want to take penicillin from our Cuban family. Of course, the Cubans will share whatever they have because it's who they are. But we want to be able to really provide support in the form of medicine and medical aid. So that's why it's critically important that whatever you are able to do to help us reach that goal, we encourage you, we urge you, we thank you for all you can do to help us as we continue to help our family, our Cuban family. Thank you all. And thanks for just being you.